However, why did this pervert, who was fine at Sculler and could torture people unscrupulously, come to Hogwarts? Moreover, why did Dumbledore allow him to join the job? Finny decided that he must ask Dumbledore later. Richie was too dangerous for him at school. Finny, who was thinking this way, didn't realize that his face had become very solemn at this time. Li Xiaodan noticed this and asked. "What's wrong, Finny? What's wrong with Professor Rich?" Only then did Finny wake up from his thoughts and shook his head and said. "No, I thought of something else. You guys go to the library first. I have something to do with Professor Dumbledore." George nodded. "Okay, then we'll wait for you in the library." Finny nodded, turned and walked towards the principal's office. The stone statue at the door of the principal's office requires a password to open. However, Dumbledore's password is easy to guess. Just read Duke B's candy list in front of the stone statue. As I walked up the stairs, I heard Dumbledore's voice. "It seems that I really should change my password. There is actually such a way to find the password." It could be heard that Dumbledore was a little concerned about Finny trying out the password with the candy list. However, this also illustrates that Dumbledore knew that Finny was coming when he arrived, but still did not open the door to the office to let Finny in, but let him try the password on his own. "Professor Dumbledore, you have to know that I will not come to your office if it is not necessary. Therefore, you should have let me in just now instead of asking me to try the passwords one by one." Dumbledore smiled and said. Okay, then, Mr. Black, what do you want to see me for?" Only then did Finny remember the business, looked at Dumbledore, and asked. "Professor, do you know what Sakaski Rich used to do?" Dumbledore nodded and said. "I have some understanding. He is a professor at Skull. Being able to teach at that school, his level is naturally very high. I think it is best for him to teach your defense against the dark arts course." "What's wrong?" Finny frowned and looked at Dumbledore. "Professor, I don't believe you haven't heard anything about him, and I don't believe you don't know anything about Skull. Even if you didn't know it before, when you become a great wizard, you have full authority to contact the magic world. The existence of the deep body, including the true appearance of Skull, not to mention that you are now a legendary wizard. As long as you are willing, you can definitely have the status of an outer elder of the Presbyterian Church." Dumbledore nodded and said. "Indeed, I know something about Sculler." Finny interrupted and continued. "Now that you understand it, you should know what kind of hell it is there, and you should know how the wizards who come out of there will be mentally distorted. The patron saint spell is indeed difficult because it requires the use of emotional power, but for many great wizards who have mastered soul magic who graduated from Duel, it is not difficult at all. They cannot use this spell. Professor, have you never thought about why?" Dumbledore was silent. He knew very well what this meant. Finny continued. "The conditions for using the Patronus charm, apart from invoking emotions, are the purity of the soul. In essence, it is the purity of the soul." "That's right, Professor Dumbledore." Dumbledore nodded, indicating that what Finny said was correct. Finny continued. "After the age of 7, Skull will regularly receive the Cruciatus Curse and the Sol Imperius Curse from the professors. After the age of 8, he will begin to learn combat magic. After that, the conflicts between the young wizards will begin. They will no longer participate. As long as no one is killed and the little wizard is not destroyed, everything else does not matter. This in itself makes their minds very twisted. After the age of 11, they even start to come into contact with soul magic every week. There are goblins, house elves, werewolves, vampires, elves, and other creatures as experimental subjects for young wizards to practice magic. Because they master soul magic, wizards who graduate from Skull are more likely to enter the level of great wizards. However, because it will be more difficult for them to advance to legend, their souls are distorted, and the country's use of soul magic has tarnished their souls. Naturally, they cannot use the Patronus charm." Dumbledore spoke and took over the rest of Finny's words. "But, Mr. Black, what does this have to do with my hiring Professor Rich?" Finny sighed and told what was rumored in the Presbyterian family about the genius of Sakaski Rich. After listening to this, Dumbledore's expression began to become solemn. He could imagine that wizards who graduated from Skull would have some distortions in their minds, but he did not expect that they would be distorted to that extent. It is no wonder that most of the pureblood families of the Presbyterian Church wizards are going to be a little perverted. And Sakaski Rich happened to be a graduate of Sculler and had been teaching at Sculler for so long. The biggest reason why the unforgivable curses are unforgivable is not their effect. You know, compared to them there are even more terrifying curses in the magic world, especially for families like Finny who have access to the Presbyterian Church and have mastered many of them. However, they are still called unforgivable curses, because they will taint the soul from the depths of the soul. The more times they are used, the more serious the consequences will be. Of course, if used once or twice, they will have almost no impact on the soul, only a big impact. Scale and frequent use will have an impact. Even in Skull, the wizards responsible for using these two spells work in shifts. However, Sakaski Rich is not the one who uses these two spells for a long time. Dumbledore could not even imagine how the soul of such a wizard had been polluted. Of course, Dumbledore only valued Sakaski as a person, not his teaching at Hogwarts. He believed that the wizard still had brains and would not treat young wizards at Hogwarts. They take action. Mr. Black, I think you should know very well that the existence of Hogwarts will not allow Professor Rich to take action against the little wizards. Therefore, your worries are not that serious at all. However, I am still curious. How did you come up with the idea of paying attention to this professor? Finny said. 3 reasons. One is that the defense against the dark arts professors at Hogwarts have had some problems in recent years, either because of themselves or because of the trouble they have caused. The second thing is, it's such a coincidence. As long as I was in school, I would never meet this professor. If I hadn't asked today, I wouldn't have known that the professor of defense against dark arts in the school would be him. The third point, and the most important point, is that Maris Flint doesn't have the brains to say anything to start a family war. Dumbledore was stunned, looked at Finny and asked. You mean, Professor Rich caused the incident between the Black and Flint families? Finny nodded. This is very possible. Of course, it is only possible. I don't have any evidence. However, according to the news I heard before, Professor Rich is definitely a big trouble. In addition, Black, and the Rich family the conflict lasted for more than a day or two, and it is entirely possible that he wants to test me with the Flint family. Using a family as a test, Dumbledore's eyelids jumped when he heard this. If this is true, then Professor Richie really cannot stay in Hogwarts, even if he teaches the defense against the dark arts class in person. It's better than leaving such a big hidden danger in the castle. Moreover, Dumbledore also took a defense against the dark arts course before becoming a professor of transfiguration. However, he just thought about it this way. Behind Sakaski Rich was the Rich family who had the same status as Black and Selwyn. Even though Dumbledore had the power of the legendary wizard, he still had to consider the Presbyterian Council. Manner. To rashly expel the heir of a Presbyterian consul family from the position of professor would inevitably be called disrespecting the Presbyterian Church. Moreover, Dumbledore himself had other considerations. There are too few wizards in the wizarding world who are willing to take the position of Professor of Defense against the Dark Arts at Hogwarts. He has only decided on the candidates for the Defense against the Dark Arts Professor position for the next 7 years, but those people are all prepared for Harry Potter, the Savior, and it is not easy to find this great wizard of the Rich family. I am willing to be this professor. If I drive him away, it will be more difficult to find professors at Hogwarts in the future. There have long been rumors in the wizarding world that the position of Professor of Defense against the Dark Arts at Hogwarts has been cursed by Voldemort. Dumbledore knew very well that there was indeed a problem with this position, but it was not a curse, but a deeper curse. Even he could not be sure whether the curse on this position would still exist after Voldemort's complete death. Grudge is a kind of spell that uses soul as raw material. It has similar effect to curse, but is much stronger. It is not based on the name of a certain position, nor is it based on a certain location. It is based on the resentment of the person who cast the spell. Voldemort's resentment at that time was that he could not become the defense against the dark arts professor at Hogwarts. Therefore, even if the position was changed to a different name, a different professor, or a different school, as long as the position was still essentially the same, he would still be resented. The influence of the curse. This curse is not a spell that will directly affect people. It will only affect the luck of the employees in the entire position and expose their own problems by chance. Just like the previous Professor Jonathan, he himself faced internal problems within the vampires. However, after taking office, his luck was affected and it broke out in advance. Another example is the previous Professor Auror, who had countless enemies. Because his luck was affected, he was accidentally attacked and crippled. In the future, Quirrell was originally possessed by Voldemort, but he died like that because the curse affected his own luck, rather than the curse directly killing him. Later, Lockhart was originally a liar, Lupin was originally a werewolf, and Moody was attacked before coming to Hogwarts. These were not directly caused by the curse. The curse only weakened their luck and made them the original problem is just more likely to occur. Return to the principal's office at this time. Then Mr. Black, could you please help me pay attention to Professor Rich? I will also instruct Professor McGonagall and the others. You must know that Professor Rich's identity makes it impossible for me to accuse him without any evidence. Take action. Finny nodded and said. Okay, just right. I'm also curious about his purpose of coming to Hogwarts, and whether he controls Marcus. Dumbledore blinked and said. Then, I think, we'll all have answers soon. Finny nodded. Indeed, no matter what Richie wanted to do, it was already the end of November. Not counting the holidays, the professor only had half a year. Just in case, he would definitely advance his goals. Realization, after all, the longer it is delayed, the greater the changes will be. Ah, yes, Finny. Dumbledore suddenly said. Finny was stunned when Dumbledore called his name directly, which meant that he had something to do on his own. So, Professor, what other orders do you have? Dumbledore thought for a moment and said. Quilina's took a leave of absence from me some time ago. Finny frowned and asked. Well, the Muggle Studies professor. If he remembers correctly, it is indeed time for this person to take time off to travel. Later, he will encounter a mysterious man's wandering spirit in Albania and be possessed, becoming the final boss of Harry Potter's first grade. So, Professor, why are you telling me this? He continued to ask. Dumbledore sighed and said. Quilina's is nominally traveling to gain experience in becoming a defense against the dark arts class, but that's not actually the case. Finny was stunned. If Quirrell didn't do it for this purpose, then what was the purpose of his travels? It can't be just for the mysterious person. Wait, just for the mysterious man, if you think about it this way, many doubts in the original work can be explained clearly. Even if the mysterious man had lost his brain due to making Horcruxes, he would still understand how stupid it was to attack Harry Potter in a bright place like the Quidditch pitch where he grew up. And Quirrell, naturally, a wizard who graduated from Ravenclaw would not do such a stupid thing. Therefore, the reason why he did this was to tell other professors that there was something wrong with him. There is also the Halloween troll. He will never be stupid enough that a troll will cause any trouble to the professors. His purpose is still to warn his colleagues. There are many similar things. The time of the attack on Gringotts was too coincidental, as if he was waiting for Hagrid to transfer the Sorcerer's Stone before taking action. You know, he met Harry in person in the bar that day. There are also places to attack unicorns, transfer Dumbledore, etc. There are some troops. If he really wanted to steal the Sorcerer's Stone, there was no need to do so many unnecessary things. At least, Finny didn't think that a wizard who graduated from Ravenclaw would not know the story of using music to hypnotize a three-headed dog in Greek mythology, and would never think that Lu Wei would fall asleep when he heard music. So now all this can be explained clearly, because Quirrell was Dumbledore's man from the beginning, and he went to Albania just for the mysterious man. Dumbledore confirmed Finny's idea. He's doing it for Voldemort. Finny was stunned. He couldn't understand Dumbledore's purpose in telling him this matter. Professor, why are you telling me this? Dumbledore sighed and said. You also know Voldemort very well, don't you? I think you should have read the books about that part of the records in the Black family a long time ago, before you handed the locket to me. Finny nodded. He had indeed read all the records related to the Black family before handing the locket to Dumbledore, even though he knew it was a Horcrux from the beginning. However, in order to prevent Dumbledore's legitimacy, he still read through all those books. You must know that many of those books contain dark magic and will lure those who read them to the path of dark wizards. Indeed, but Professor, shouldn't you be very clear about this? I remember I told you about it when you helped me set up the loyalty curse that year. Dumbledore nodded and said. Since you know something about Horcruxes, you should know about the existence of wandering souls. Finny was stunned and asked. Professor, you mean that the mysterious man is now a wandering spirit, so that's why he was not found by your people? Of course he knew that Voldemort was a wandering spirit now and would be a wandering spirit even in the next few years. The wandering soul is immortal, which means that the people of the Order of the Phoenix cannot find him. Even if they find him, they can't do anything to him. Dumbledore nodded. Quillas thinks so. His friend discovered traces of Voldemort's ghost in the Albanian forest. However, he was cursed as a result, and the curse spread to Quillas. Finny was stunned and asked. So, Professor Quirrell is actually cursed. What curse? Can it be broken? Dumbledore shook his head. I don't know what the curse is. He didn't let me check it. However, from the looks of it, he must have determined the specific content of the curse and determined that it cannot be solved before he made this plan. Finny asked. What's the plan? Dumbledore shook his head and said. I don't know either. He has his own plans. The main reason why I tell you these things is that I hope you can help him in the future if possible. After all, he is also a good boy, and he has been. It's not a good time either. Finny frowned and did not agree directly. Instead, he said that he would think about it when he went back. In fact, he planned to ask his wizards to find out about Quillia's Quirrell and why Dumbledore trusts him so much. It was already noon when he came out of the principal's office. Instead of going to the library, he walked to the auditorium to have lunch. As a result, as soon as he walked into the auditorium, he saw the three extremely excited George. George and Fred each carried Finny out of the door where he had just walked in with one arm. Li Xiaodan followed the three of them with a few pieces of bread. The twins took Finny to an empty classroom before setting him down. So, what are you two going to do? I still need to eat. Finny asked helplessly. Lee Jordan handed the bread in his hand to Finny. Here, your lunch. This time, Finny felt even more helpless and glared at the three of them. If you three don't give me a qualified explanation, I will let you three hang in this professor's room all afternoon. Although it was a joke, George and the three of them still trembled, obviously thinking about what it would be like if the three of them were hung up in this classroom all afternoon. George said hurriedly. We found a great thing in the library. Very good stuff. Fred added. A treasure map. The two men said in unison, handing a piece of parchment to Finny. Finny took it speechlessly, and when he saw the words Gryffindor's treasure written on it, he became even more speechless. The thing on the parchment is even more funny. It's a very simple map. It's better to say it's a map than a simple drawing. A simple castle, the kind that can be drawn with a few strokes, and a creek, it looks like it should be a creek. A few trees, a big circle, and a big red cross. If the castle is Hogwarts Castle, the creek is the creek in the Forbidden Forest, the circle is the Black Lake, the positions of the tree-shaped patterns are the Forbidden Forest, and the position of the red cross is Hagrid's hut. Are you kidding me? What the hell is this? Li Xiaodan said excitedly. A treasure. George nodded. It's still Gryffindor's treasure. Fred nodded. That's right. Finny sighed and said. Do you really think that Gryffindor will hide its treasure in Hagrid's hut? Or do you think that if there was a real treasure map in the library, would a real treasure map still be preserved to this day? So, how did you discover it? Fred smiled and said. Inside a book. George nodded. We felt there was something wrong with that book. Li Xiaodan complained. Actually, the two of them accidentally damaged the pages of the book and leaked the treasure map. Finny asked rhetorically. So, you didn't come to me because of this treasure map at all, but you wanted me to help repair the book? Li Xiaodan nodded and said. We tried the repair spell, but it had no effect at all. Finny nodded and asked. Where's the book? George hurriedly took out a fallen book from his bag and handed it to Finny. You didn't break a page, you tore the book apart. Fred rubbed his head and said with a sheepish smile. After we found the treasure map, we wanted to see if there were others in it, so. Finny sighed, glanced at the cover of the book, and said with relief. Fortunately, I also have this book in my personal library. I'll just change the covers of the two books once in a while. I don't think I'll be able to help you next time. As he spoke, he snapped his fingers, and Puff, carrying a suitcase, appeared in front of several people. The four of them walked along the stairs in the box to Finny's private library underneath the box. Well, Godric's Travels, here it is. Finny rummaged around on the bookshelf and took out a brand new book. He changed the covers of the two books, handed them to George and said, "Return this book. Remember, don't destroy the books in the library next time. I don't have some books there, so I can't help you." After watching George and the other three leave the library in the box with the book, Finny lowered his head and examined the torn pages in his hand. When he touched these pages, he felt a magical aura that was not very strong. You know, this is just the most ordinary travel book. If there is something special about it, it is that the protagonist of this book is the same as Gryffindor. However, this book will be written earlier. Finny sometimes wondered if Gryffindor was named after the protagonist of this book. As a book written 1,000 years ago, it is still published and sold today. Although it is not a bad book, you can still find it if you are interested. But just such a book, which is neither rare nor precious in terms of content or essence, has fluctuations in magical power. What's more, he did try to use the repair spell secretly just now, and it didn't work. Unaffected by magic effects. Finny frowned and checked the pages in his hand. He made sure that there were no other mezzanines. The contents on the pages were also the contents of Godric's Travels that are currently circulating in the magical world. There were no discrepancies. Since it's not a problem with the content, then it's a problem with the book itself. The paper itself in this book is not affected by magic, and the content inside is just a cover-up to hide the truth. If you think so, Finny suddenly couldn't believe the simplicity of the book that was taken away by George and the others. The parchment treasure map gained some interest. A treasure map hidden in this specially disguised book is definitely not that simple. Now that he thinks of this, according to Finny's character, he will naturally not put things off until later. Especially according to the characters of those three people, they will definitely take risks according to that stupid and ridiculous treasure map. They were not looking for treasure from the beginning, but for adventure. It was too dangerous to let those three go out with a treasure map that they were completely unsure of, and besides, Finny had a hunch that the treasure map might be important to him. Therefore, Finny immediately left the box and prepared to look for the three Georges. Their current Gryffindor class had no classes this afternoon, so these three people were likely to go on an adventure directly according to the contents of the treasure map. Went. The end point of Finny's treasure map is near Hagrid's hut, so he plans to go directly to Hagrid's place. Hagrid is a person whom Dumbledore trusts very much. Although he often does wrong things because of his giant blood, he is still entrusted with important tasks by Dumbledore many times. However, because of James Potter and Finny's brother Sirius, Hagrid was very repulsive to Finny, not to mention that Finny came from Slytherin house, which he hated the most. Therefore, Finny did not go to Hagrid's cabin to wait for George and the others, but stood beside the Forbidden Forest and waited. Unfortunately, this scene was also seen by Hagrid. "Are you going to sneak into the Forbidden Forest? Get out of here as soon as possible, you are not welcome here." Hagrid didn't say anything harsh, but he still drove Finny away from the edge of the Forbidden Forest and away from his cabin. Hagrid knew very well that what Sirius did had nothing to do with Finny, but as a member of the Black family, Hagrid just couldn't accept Finny. "Aha, Finny. I told you you would come on this adventure with us." The Weasley brothers also came to the area at this time and happened to see Finny being driven away by Hagrid. They said happily. Hagrid heard the sound and saw the twins that gave him a headache. "Weasley twins. You cannot enter the Forbidden Forest. Dumbledore does not allow you to enter the Forbidden Forest. It is too dangerous for you. Get out of here as soon as possible." Hagrid became excited when he saw the arrival of the twins. He kept waving his big hands in the air, as if that could help him drive away the four little wizards in front of him. This should be a habit he developed when he tamed the group of Thestrals, Finny guessed. Fred and George saw Hagrid's actions and wanted to break into the Forbidden Forest to tease Hagrid. Of course, this meant that they hated Hagrid. It was precisely because Hagrid was nice to many little wizards, so George only with Fred would express their friendship in this way. Well, there is absolutely no reason why Hagrid likes to play tricks on him just because he is stupid. However, Finny stopped them. Let's go back to the castle first. I have something important to ask you. George, Fred and Lee Jordan stopped making trouble after hearing this. They are all very reliable in important matters. Finny's initiative to save the situation actually made Hagrid change his view of him a little. He felt that he was still a good boy, but it was a pity that he was sorted into Slytherin. Finny took the three of them to the previously vacant classroom. At this time, his suitcase was still placed among the professors. The four of them came to Finny's private library again. Finny, what are you looking for us for? Li Qiaodan said. Finny raised the open travel book on the table and said. Let me ask first, have you returned that book? George nodded. After we left your place, we returned the book as soon as possible before going to Hagrid's place. Finny nodded, took out the wand from his cane, and waved it gently in the air. 3 single beanbags appeared in the center of the room. Let's sit down and talk. Wow, Professor McGonagall will definitely be able to speak excellent transformation spells here. 10 points for Slytherin. George said, and Fred on the side added. Professor Snape would say that using spells in public, Mr. Black, can I think you are showing off your talent? 1 point deducted from Slytherin. Li Qiaodan said with a smile. You guys gathered to cause trouble, 50 points will be deducted from Gryffindor. As Lee Jordan finished speaking, several people laughed because Snape could really do such a thing. Okay, the joke will be on for a while. Let me tell you what I discovered first. The content of this book is just an ancient but very ordinary travelogue. You should all have read it. George and the two nodded, and Li Qiaodan said excitedly. Of course I have. When I was little, my dad told me stories about that book. Finny nodded and continued. However, this book is not affected by magical effects. I don't know how you made this book look like this, but at least no matter what spell I cast on it, it will be invalid. Li Qiaodan said with a smile. The first time was when I accidentally got the page wet. George added. Then I noticed that the parchment was a little thicker than the others. Finny suddenly thought of the scene at that time and asked with some uncertainty. So, you got the whole book wet just to test your idea? Fred nodded and said. To test the idea, isn't this just the discovery of the mezzanine? Finny was suddenly speechless. Since you have wetted the entire book, there are naturally no interlayers in the other pages. You took the book apart without even realizing it. Li Qiaodan touched his head and said with a smile. I won't think about it until the disassembly is complete. Finny was speechless, but didn't know what to say. He looked down at the parchment in his hand and found that the writing on it was not blurred by water. He couldn't help but feel strange. He didn't think that the person who made this book would deliberately enchant the contents in the book to prevent them from getting wet. You know, Finny had checked the contents of this book very carefully before, and there was nothing wrong with it at all. A different place. Therefore, the person who made this book must have meant something else by casting magic on the words, not the content of the words, but the words themselves. However, Finny did not think of any special meaning to the words themselves. They are just the most common words, the same ones used by Muggles. They are not magical ancient magic words, nor are they special words with metaphorical meanings. They are just a very ordinary travel biography. Of course, if this book production of the book these are the words of the author at the beginning of this biography, so it is understandable that Finny cast spells on the words. After all, these are his experiences, and they can also be said to be his diaries. However, this does not explain why there is a treasure map with Gryffindor's treasure in the book. You must know that this book was written around the time when Gryffindor was born, so the author of this travel book cannot have such a thing as Gryffindor's treasure map. In addition, this book is not affected by magical effects, which eliminates the possibility of hiding treasure maps in the book after it is produced. So this idea is wrong. If you think about it from another angle, the person who produced this book is the person who hid the treasure map, which is understandable. Finny told the three George his conclusion. The three of them looked at each other. They had no idea that what they thought was just a simple reason for taking risks would make Finny think of so many things, and it was very reasonable. So for a while, the three of them didn't know what to do with the treasure map in their hands. According to your inference, this treasure map is not simple, but the things on it. Li Qiaodan said doubtfully. Finny nodded. So, I suspect that what is recorded on it may not be what it originally looked like. As he spoke, he took the treasure map, pointed the wand on it, and whispered. Xian is your secret. However, half a day passed and there was still no change in the treasure map. This made Finny feel very depressed. Did he really think too much? Or is it that the richness of this treasure map refers to the material rather than the things on it? Finny turned over the treasure map repeatedly and looked at it. He did see traces of magic on it, but it was very faint. He didn't know whether it was because it was too long ago, or whether the magic on it was a very simple magic. How's it going? Did you find anything? George asked, and he and Fred suddenly realized that if this treasure map was not simple, would the Gryffindor treasure written on it also be real? Finny shook his head and said. I'm pretty sure it's enchanted, but I don't know what kind of magic it is. It's really not simple. It's probably really related to Gryffindor's treasure. Yes, judging from the current situation, this may really be a clue to Gryffindor's treasure. However, Finny has been looking for clues to Gryffindor's inheritance. If it is true, it will be very difficult. Maybe that's what Finny is looking for. Li Qiaodan thought for a moment and said. How about I leave this treasure map here for now while you study it while we look for any other clues in the library? Upon hearing this, Finny couldn't care less about the treasure map and hurriedly said. No, absolutely don't. According to your habit of opening books to look for clues, you won't be able to return as many books as I have. So, just wait until I figure out what the curse is on this. With that said, he didn't care about the three people in front of him. He got up and went to the bookshelves around the room and started rummaging. He remembered that there was a comprehensive collection of paper secrecy spells. The three Georges watched Finny start to busy deciphering the treasure map, and then they were about to get up and go to the auditorium to wait for the meal. Just then, Puff came here with some snacks and juice. The master has given instructions before to prepare juice and desserts for the young masters. Yeah, Finny wants us to stay here and help him. George smiled bitterly and said. Fred nodded, got up and went to the bookshelf to help Finny look for information. George and Lee Jordan sat there and started eating. They planned to work after eating. Time gradually passed, and the four of them still didn't make much progress. George and Fred continued to cast spells on the treasure map according to the methods in the book, trying to find out the truth about this piece of paper. Lee Jordan was still flipping through the book, while Finny was experimenting with the scattered pages. Perhaps the magic on these pages was the same as on the treasure map. Found it, found it. Suddenly, George shouted excitedly. Several people looked at the twins, and Fred said proudly. We changed the spell target from the entire map to the words Gryffindor's treasure, and then the whole map changed. Finny took the map and looked at it. Sure enough, the pattern on the map was no longer a simple map, but some ancient magic words with magic. There was a square in the upper right corner, and a pointer inside the square was constantly rotating. Finny moved the map, and the pointer followed it. It seems that the pointer is pointing to the location of the treasure, but what does the text on it mean? Lee Jordan asked. Finny shook his head and said. I took a rough look, it's not coherent, but it looks like a chart. Just when Finny said the word chart, he suddenly realized something and hurried to check the scattered pages. Sure enough, there were some incomplete small symbols in the corners of these pages and above the page numbers. And the corners of the four connected pages can form an ancient magic code. So, the magic on these pages is not protecting the words on them, but protecting the incomplete symbols in this corner. George looked at the ancient magic words spelled out by Finny and said. Finny nodded, and kept moving his hands, copying the symbols on these pages onto a blank piece of parchment, and converting them into other words according to the table. Then an article appeared in front of the four people, written in universal script. In 987 AD, I and 3 friends founded this school together and named it Hogwarts. The main purpose of establishing the school was to protect the young wizards who were persecuted by muggles and prevent them from suppressing their magic. Talented and became obscurist died a violent death. However, with the establishment of the school, some problems also emerged. We all have different personalities. In my opinion, today's era needs more wizards who have the courage to resist. Rowena believes that wisdom is the most important thing for a wizard to grow. Salazar felt that talent was more important. At that time, wizards with excellent talents were often descendants of pure-blood families, so he preferred wizards with pure blood. Helga is the kindest among us. In her opinion, any young wizard deserves their help and education. Because of our discordant concepts, we had a quarrel and eventually established 4 colleges to help each other and compete with each other. As time passed, some Muggle-born wizards told other Muggles about the school, causing Hogwarts to face its first crisis since its establishment. Although that crisis was successfully resolved, we also hit Hogwarts so that Muggles would not see, hear, or even detect it. However, on the issue of recruiting Muggle wizards, the differences between us have become more serious. According to Salazar, since they can betray once, they can betray twice, 3 times or even more. He believes that we should not recruit pure Muggle wizards, but should focus on half-blood or pure-blood wizards. After one of the most heated arguments we'd ever had, Salazar left school with a grumbling message. I sealed the Chamber of Secrets, and no one can open it again until my heir comes here. He will open the Chamber of Secrets, release the most terrifying things inside, purify the campus, get rid of harmful Muggle wizards, and protect Hogwarts. When he saw this, Li Qiaodan suddenly said, "Wait a minute, wasn't the reason why Slytherin left the Chamber of Secrets clear of all Muggle wizards? Why does it say?" Finny nodded and said, "If this is really something left by Gryffindor, then the rumors about Hogwarts for thousands of years are all wrong. Slytherin did not leave the Chamber of Secrets to clear up Muggle wizards, but to protect Hogwarts." After saying that, the 4 of them continued to watch. After Salazar left, I also began to reflect on myself. Indeed, it was too dangerous for us to allow anyone to join Hogwarts. Therefore, Rowena, Helga, and I jointly cast a spell on the school. A secrecy spell. No Muggle-born wizard can tell anything about Hogwarts to other Muggles. This spell is time-limited. We don't think the current situation of wizards will last forever. Sooner or later it will improve. Yes, by that time, maybe wizards and Muggles can coexist peacefully. Although we found a solution, there is still no trace of Salazar. We cannot find him. There is no trace of him in the places we have been before. It is as if he has disappeared from this world. As time passed, the 3 of us grew older and could no longer look for traces of Salazar. Later, Rowena's adopted daughter stole her crown. This was something I didn't expect. Rowena's crown had no effect at all. Later, Rowena proposed to save all the knowledge she had and wait for this when her daughter comes back. If possible, it would be good to leave some inheritance to the younger generations of the school. This idea is very good, so I also left some things and hid them all in the Black Lake. Helga also left some things, but not enough. I don't know where she put them. However, when I think about it, when the younger generations are looking for the inheritance we left behind, it is also very interesting to continue taking risks through hard work and wisdom. There is a long blank space after that. Rona left anyway. Before she died, she did not see her daughter. Helga was very sad and locked herself in her dungeon and never came out again. I am also old, I know very well that I won't live long, but there is still no trace of Salazar. Has he forgotten us? I wanted to wait for him to come back and apologize to him. If I hadn't been so tough, he wouldn't have left. I cast a spell on myself, and it will take some time to take effect. After I turn into a Nimigus form, I can never change back, but it can give me a long life and let me protect this place forever. Slytherin Castle, waiting for the return of Salazar, I recorded all these things and put them in one of his favorite books. I am going to protect my inheritance and this castle. There is no more content after that. Obviously, this is what Gryffindor wanted to leave behind. Wow, there really is Gryffindor's treasure. George and Fred said excitedly in unison. Lee Jordan shook his head and said, "Didn't you see that? That's not Gryffindor's treasure but inheritance, and it's in the Black Lake. We don't know the head-breaking charm yet." Finny said. "Even if we know the head-breaking charm, it's hard to get to the depths of the Black Lake." You know, there's a tribe of mermaids in there, not to mention grindylows, sea monsters with horse-headed fishtails, loboworms and other creatures. Also, I suspect that the giant octopus in the Black Lake is Gryffindor. Ah. The three of them made a very surprised sound. Finny nodded and said. According to the notes he left behind, he cast a spell on himself, trapping himself in the animagus form forever, and allowing him to live forever to protect Hogwarts. The only thing that can meet this requirement is the octopus in the Black Lake. I have read the records that it has existed in Hogwarts for a long time. Octopuses can grow very large, not to mention living for thousands of years. Therefore, it is very likely that the big octopus is Gryffindor himself. The three George nodded. What Finny said was indeed the most likely one. Is there any other possibility? Since Gryffindor left the treasure, it will not be inaccessible to others. Fred said reluctantly. Finny nodded, looked at the scattered pages on the table and said. He should have left other things in it, otherwise this book would be completely redundant. The notes he left behind do not need to be hidden separately in a book. After all, he also performed a certain amount of text replacement and encryption. Li Xiaodan asked. Do you think there is something similarly important in this book? But haven't we all tried it many times? Fred nodded and agreed with Jordan's words and said. That's right, we have tried all the writing magic you recorded here, and the papers have not changed. Finny shook his head and said. Indeed, but I was wondering if, like that treasure map, it was not the entire paper that was enchanted but a certain text on it. George's eyes widened when he heard this, and he looked at Finny in disbelief and asked. You mean you want to try it word by word? Fred said in shock. Oh my God, there are hundreds of thousands of words here at least. Try them one by one. How long will it take? Finny shook his head helplessly and said. Try it slowly, after all, there is a quantity, and there will always be a day when the trial is finished. Moreover, Gryffindor's treasure is indeed very attractive, isn't it? If you can find a way to obtain the treasure without going through the Black Lake, wouldn't that make everyone happy? George and Fred looked at each other, as if they had made a decision, and said to Finny. In this case, let's help together for the sake of the treasure. Seeing that the twins had said this, Li Xiaodan naturally expressed his intention to stay and help. With concerted efforts, the progress and work efficiency will be much higher. Finny asked Puff to prepare a bed in the box. The four of them did not go back to their respective college dormitories to rest at night, but chose to stay in the box. Finny, let's discuss something. The next day, after resting in the box all night, George and Fred ran to Finny and whispered. Finny knew what they were thinking as soon as he saw the two of them, and refused. Don't even think about it. George and Fred looked at each other, then sat down next to Finny and said. No, man. That's right, please help me. Li Xiaodan looked at the three of them doubtfully and asked. What are you talking about? George smiled and said. This box Finny is so useful. Especially when traveling at night. We don't need to go back to the dormitory at all. We just need to take this box with us when we go out at night and hide in it when needed. Fred and George each stated their plans one sentence at a time. Finny rolled his eyes and said. I knew you were making this idea. Don't even think about it. Let me tell you. I don't want to talk about whether you are doing it right or not. I still have use for this box. When I have the opportunity, I will get you a similar one. That's it. When George and Fred heard this, they looked at Finny with shining eyes. Are you serious? Finny nodded. Really, you usually study those prank props in an empty classroom. Not to mention the dangers, and accidents often happen. Let me get you a similar box. If nothing else, at least you don't need to go to an empty classroom to do it. Experimented. George and Fred high-fived excitedly, then rummaged harder for information, casting magic on the page in their hands. Looking at Li Xiaodan stunned for a moment. Is this still possible? As a roommate, he knows best how naughty these twins are, so he also knows best how difficult it is to get them to do a job so seriously. Even if this work is also of great interest to them, they will still get distracted and wander off. The two of them are very talented, but their natures are very different and they can't concentrate on anything. However, after a few words from Finny, they are very serious about completing one thing. This shocked Li Qiaodan very much. Finny smiled and said to Li Jordan. Of course. Although the two of them are a little out of the ordinary, they still have things they want to do, such as taking risks and developing their own prank props. I just combined the two things together. Their nature naturally, they are much more vigorous. After all, they are still eager for adventure. Li Qiaodan nodded thoughtfully, and then ran to the two of them, taking the risk. He was also eager for it, okay? Looking at the three people who were occasionally fighting and decrypting the pages of the book carefully, Finny smiled slightly, then lowered his head to look at the pages in his hands. At the same time, he turned on the magical visual effects of Jonathan's echo and observed the magic traces on the pages. Existence will inevitably leave traces, and magic is even more likely to leave traces. The traces left by different people vary according to their personalities, habits, and different magics. The great wizard can simply observe the traces of magic power, while the legendary wizard can judge the magic based on the traces of magic power, and even determine who is casting the spell. What Finny had to do at this time was to analyze Gryffindor's character and the magic he cast based on the traces of magic. However, the scene in front of him was completely unimaginable to Finny. This is impossible. Finny was shocked and thought in his heart that it was difficult to accept. The page was not cast with any text-based confidentiality spell, nor even a confidentiality spell. But a transfiguration spell. Yes, these pages were not affected by magic effects, could not be repaired, changed, or destroyed, and had ordinary contents, but the pages with Gryffindor's notes were actually cast with a transfiguration spell. An unfinished transfiguration spell. If Finny did not have the magical vision brought by Jonathan's echo, which allowed him to master some of the things that only legendary wizards could do in advance, then he would never have discovered this. Unless his transfiguration spell level was at the next level, and he was very familiar with transfiguration and was sensitive, otherwise, he felt that he could not discover it. Okay, guys, I think I found a solution to this puzzle. Since it was an unfinished transfiguration spell, then there were obviously only two ways to solve it, either to complete the transfiguration spell, or to undo the transfiguration spell. The first half of the transfiguration spell that Gryffindor left on the page was completed before. In short, it was determined what it would become. What Finny has to do is to fill in the second half, input magic power, and complete the deformation of the object along the deformation marks left on the front half. Finny put all the pages together, waved his wand, and most of his magic power was consumed in an instant. The pages in front of him were also affected by the magic, flying up from the table, combining with each other, and then forming a spindle-shaped airtight container. There is also a turntable switch above the container, and a translucent material in front reveals the inside. After completing the transformation, Finny climbed above the container, turned the turntable, and opened an entrance. 4 people walked in, and it was very crowded inside, because this thing was designed to be used by one person. It was okay for 2 people, but it was very crowded for 3 people, let alone 4 people now. Finny observed that there were some ancient magic scripts on the walls around the container. The words that had been left on the page to form Gryffindor's notes before they were formally written. However, due to deformation and combination, they became another order. Finny took a rough look and found that the effect was that the magic input by the people inside could be converted into the power of this thing. At the same time, there is a sphere directly in front of the container. The sphere connects the container and forms a combination with the surrounding text. People inside the container can input magic power through the sphere to activate the container. At the same time, they can also control the direction of the container through the sphere. It shouldn't be called a container now. This is completely a means of transportation, much like a submarine, because the pages themselves will not be affected by water, not to mention that after the transformation spell is cast, the material itself changes. Wow! Asterisk 3. The 3 Georges looked at what they saw in front of them in shock, feeling very emotional. Finny smiled and said, "It seems that we can venture to the Black Lake to find Gryffindor's treasure. This thing is the way for Gryffindor to stay and enter the Black Lake. Then when do we set off?" Fred looked at Finny excitedly. Finny looked at the 3 of them and asked, "There is no need to rush this matter. Gryffindor's treasure is just there, running away. However, you must know that the treasure he left behind must be dangerous. We must be prepared before we go. We can think of all the possible solutions to difficulties that may arise. George nodded and said. That makes sense, so, when do we leave? Finny patted his head helplessly. How could he think that George was aware of the danger of this matter? Maybe they are all aware of it, but after comparing it with taking risks, they feel that taking risks is more important. However, Finny does plan to go to Gryffindor's treasure as soon as possible. After all, if nothing unexpected happens, Gryffindor's inheritance is really in the same place as the treasure as the note he left behind. Although Finny has not yet fully understood the Ravenclaw inheritance, the rewards for the task of finding the inheritance of the 4 founders and the task of exploring Hogwarts are very good, and they still need to be completed as soon as possible. This is Friday night. We have 2 days, Saturday and Sunday, which should be enough. Moreover, today is only Wednesday, and there are still 2 days to prepare. Li Xiaodan looked a little worried when he heard this. Although he also likes to take risks, he understands the dangers involved. He agreed very much with what Finny said before, and he should be prepared before setting off. He originally thought that Finny's preparation was calculated in terms of months, if not years, but it turned out that it was indeed calculated in terms of days, and there were only 2 days left. Sky. Finny, are you in a hurry? If there is really any danger, Finny smiled and said. There is danger for sure, but there is a high probability that it will not be fatal. After all, Gryffindor leaves a legacy and leaves treasures for future generations to find, so don't worry. In fact, although Finny said this, he knew very well that there was definitely a fatal danger in it. If nothing else, the creatures in the Black Lake were deadly enough to the 4 of them. It's unclear whether the submarine transformed from the book page in front of me is effective or not. The reason why he decided to set off on the weekend was to leave time to test the submarine. Not only did he actually look for treasures, he also wanted to make sure that this thing could really dive and how many people it could protect when attacked. Of course, Finny would not be stupid enough to test this thing himself. This task is still for Puff. House elves who can apparate at any time are the most suitable for this kind of experiment. Once danger arises, they can leave there directly. No need to worry about safety. In the past 2 days, in addition to Puff's experiments, Finny also made some other preparations, the most important of which were some ancient magic that can be used underwater. There are also some magic props made through alchemy, including rings that protect against evil spells, hats that cast head bubbly spells, invisibility cloaks with a certain duration, and one-time controllable door key boots. Most of these magic props were invented by Nico and recorded in the notes he gave to Finny. Finny can make them directly as long as he follows the steps and methods in the notes. Finny, who has system bonuses, can succeed in just one go, and each item is worth 4 points. By then each of the 4 of them will have 1 share, and most of the crises will be over. At least there will be no problem in escaping. Turn on the protective shield, turn on the bubble charm, turn on the invisibility cloak, and then activate the door key to return directly to Hogwarts, completely safe. If Finny had discovered the map and notes by himself, he would have definitely looked for the treasure by himself, instead of taking George, Fred, and Lee Jordan with him, not because he wanted to share the treasure with them, but because of the treasure hunt. Adventures are always accompanied by death. But now, it is the map and notes that George and the 3 of them discovered. If Finny doesn't take them with him, it seems that he wants to take it all to himself, so all he can do now is to provide some effective protection, or that in a word, I don't expect to find the treasure, but at least I can come back safely. Being busy, time passed very quickly, especially since Finny had rarely gone to class since the beginning of this semester. In the past 2 days, he just stayed in the box and never left. He was refining and making preparations the whole time. On Friday evening, George, Fred and Lee Jordan came to this empty classroom and entered the box to find Finny. Finny, we are ready, let's go. Fred said excitedly. George and Lee Jordan were also very excited. Things have been busy recently and I haven't taken time to look at the data in the back end. Therefore, I am very sorry for not thanking the readers who have recently tipped. Also, the back end seems to have been updated. I can't see the specific list of previous rewards today. So I won't thank you one by one. Finny looked at the 3 and asked. So, what have you prepared? Lee Jordan opened the backpack he was carrying, revealing the contents inside: sealed bread, butterbeer, and some candies and snacks. Cauldron cake, butterbeer, BB multi-flavor beans, chocolate frogs, licorice wands. Finny looked at Lee Jordan's introduction with a black line. "Wait, Lee, you didn't prepare all the food, did you?" Lee Jordan nodded and said, "I have read all my travel notes and adventure novels in the past 2 days, and found that food is very important. The protagonists in those books often encounter various accidents because of lack of food." Finny was a little speechless, looking at George and Fred. "What have you brothers prepared?" Big dung egg, laborious pull out the fireworks." Stop, stop, stop. "Are all the props you prepared for pranks?" Finny asked after the twins' words. George and Fred nodded, confirming Finny's doubts. Finny was speechless. He thought he had explained the dangers of this adventure clearly before, and judging from Lee Jordan's expression at the time, he should have understood the dangers. As a result, he prepared food. Of course, food is also a very important thing and is still useful. However, what the twins prepared was a bit redundant. They were all props for pranks. Finny handed the prepared props to the 3 people helplessly and said, "Here, the things I prepared for you are a ring to protect against evil spells, a hat that casts a bubble head spell, an invisible cloak with a certain time limit, and a one-time controllable door key boot. When you encounter danger, activate the ring, then activate the cloak, and finally activate the door key on the boot. If there is a problem with the submarine in the Black Lake, remember to activate the hat, and then the above series of activities." The 3 people took out their equipment, nodded, and understood. Finny sighed and said, "Puff. Send the box to the Black Lake." He pulled the wand out of the cane and placed the cane in a corner of the library in the box. In the Black Lake, a wand with a cane is more troublesome than a wand that is just a wand, so Finny chose to take the wand with him instead of the cane. Everything was ready, and Puff brought the box to the side of the Black Lake. The 4 of them worked together to put the book page submarine next to the Black Lake. Because the place they chose was very close to the Forbidden Forest, it was a very secret corner. In addition, it was already evening, and almost everyone in Hogwarts was eating in the hall, so no one discovered it. "Okay, let's go in and get ready to go," Finny said, and was the first to walk into the submarine. It was very tight inside, as mentioned before. It's not that Finny didn't think about casting the Traceless Stretch spell on it, but this submarine inherited the characteristics of the book page and was not affected by any magic effects except the transformation spell. After George and the other 2 squeezed in, Finny took out the map, looked at the pointer in the upper left corner of the map, and held the magic ball with his other hand, and began to input magic control and the submarine to move forward according to the direction of the map. Puff on the shore of the Black Lake watched the submarine gradually disappear into the Black Lake, and then closed the box that was open on the ground, picked it up, and disappeared on the spot with a snap of his fingers. In the Black Lake, the submarine continued to move forward in the direction of the pointer. Everything went very smoothly, which made Finny and the other 4 breathe a sigh of relief. The Black Lake was not actually dark. Instead, it was just a little dim because of the light emitted by some aquatic magic plants. The hazy scenery surprised everyone. You know, few students in Hogwarts can enter the bottom of the Black Lake to see these scenery. Although Finny is a Slytherin student, and Slytherin's public lounge is indeed under the Black Lake. However, in fact, only a small part of the Black Lake scenery can be seen through the window in Slytherin's public lounge, and that small part is often blocked by the big octopus that is suspected to be Gryffindor. So, this scene is the first time that Finny has seen it. The black water plants kept waving, entangled, and nodded to form a strange jungle with smooth mud and sand containing glittering stones. Occasionally, 1 or 2 small fish like silver shuttles swam around the submarine, and there were also some huge, black wood and water plants, which surprised several people from time to time. They were all praying that the octopus would not appear nearby. As the submarine passed by, one after another water monsters with horns appeared in the water plants on both sides, that is, Grindylow. They have long nails, sharp teeth, and are very fierce. This kind of creature will actively attack all creatures around them. They often live in water plants. If you encounter them in the water, it will be a very troublesome thing. However, they also have their unique weaknesses. Although they are fierce and aggressive, their physical fitness is very poor. Humans can break their limbs with just a little effort. When the Gryndalow saw the submarine, they began to swim towards the submarine frantically, and tried to attack the submarine with their sharp claws and teeth. Stop them, use the extraction spell. Finny shouted to George, Fred and Lee Jordan while controlling the submarine. Finny was not sure whether the Gryndalows could harm the submarine, but it was certain that they could hinder the submarine's progress. Moreover, the air in the submarine was limited, and it had to reach the destination within a certain period of time. You know, the number of people in the submarine was beyond the original design of Gryffindor. It was uncertain whether there was enough oxygen in the submarine at the beginning. Now, of course, they couldn't be disturbed by these annoying little things. How to do it? George shouted at Finny. They also realized the problem at this time and drew their wands. Finny said. Just use magic on them. The whole submarine can transmit the attack magic. Don't worry about hurting the submarine. Relax and release. Asterisk 3. 3 extraction spells were shot out from the wands of George and the other 2 as Finny finished speaking. However, the spell that was supposed to have a spark effect now turned into a stream of boiling water in the water, hitting the Gryndalows surrounding the submarine. The actions of the few people and Gryndalow stirred up the thick black mud at the bottom of the lake, and the originally strange and beautiful scenery around them became dim, and even made people feel a little nauseous after looking at it for a long time. The submarine continued to move forward, and not long after, the 4 people heard a burst of singing. The songs of the mermaids, although hauntingly beautiful due to their unique language, are incomprehensible in the air. The biggest characteristic of the mermaid's singing is that once the sound-transmitting substance leaves the water and appears in the air, it will cause dizziness, nausea, upset, and dryness in people, and it is extremely unpleasant to listen to. The most amazing thing about mermaid songs is that even if you don't understand the language of mermaids, you can still understand what they mean when you hear their songs in the water. Listening to the singing gradually getting louder, Finny and the others understood that the submarine was approaching in the direction of the mermaids. Should we go in another direction? George asked with lingering fear. Gryndalow's attack just now scared them. You know, once Gryndalow destroys the submarine, they will be directly exposed to the Black Lake. Although he has the head bubble charm hat made by Finny, the defensive ring, and the door key that can be opened at any time to escape. However, once you leave this time, there will be no second chance to dive into the Black Lake. They knew very well that without the submarine left by Gryffindor, they would not be able to dive into such a deep place. This is already a very deep place in the Black Lake. The submarine continued to move forward, and several people saw the scene in the lake through the transparency in front of the submarine. There are many stone statues at the bottom of the water, all in the shape of snakes, fish, mermaids and Gryndalows. Stone statues are scattered around an open space, and inside the statues are some simple houses made of stones. Inside the house there are some creatures with iron-gray skin, long dark green hair, bright yellow eyes and mutilated and delayed creatures. They are what are called mermaids. These creatures, with pebbles, shells, pearls and other items hung on their necks on rough ropes, are completely different from the mermaids in fairy tales. They don't have so-called beautiful bodies, nor are they kind and friendly creatures. You know, mermaids are also called sirens. In ancient Greek mythology, sirens are a kind of people who use their singing voices to make passing sailors lose their minds and cause ships to hit the rocks and sink. Often wandering among rocks or ships in the sea, they are also called sirens. In fact, these things recorded in ancient Greek mythology are all true. Most mermaids will indeed sing songs on the rocks in the sea to lure sailors and obtain food. Yes, as carnivorous creatures, in some cases, their food is drowned sailors. When the mermaids discovered the arrival of the submarine, they ran out of the stone houses with spears in hand, slapping the lake water with their thick traveling fish tails, causing waves of water, and made themselves ready to attack at any time. Seeing the actions of the mermaids, the 4 Finnies couldn't help but become nervous. You must know that unlike the previous encounter with Gryndalow, if the mermaids launched an attack, they would be attacked by both the mermaids and Gryndalow. You know, to a certain extent, Gryndalow is the hound of the mermaids, just like the human hound. Finny, what should I do? Lee Jordan asked Finny in a trembling voice. Finny shook his head and said, I don't know either. Everyone, be prepared. Once they take action, just use more lethal spells, crushing spells, etc. Don't be unable to attack them. As he spoke, he accelerated the speed of the submarine, intending to pass through the mermaid village quickly. Upon noticing the movement of the submarine, the mermaids began to feel uneasy. The spears in their hands began to wave up and down, and the frequency of the fish's tail slapping the lake water became much faster. Although the mermaids were restless, they still did not attack the submarine. Instead, they looked at their leader, waiting for the leader to give orders. In this very tense atmosphere on both sides, the submarine gradually entered the depths of the mermaid village. It's over, the treasure is located in the mermaid's village. Looking at the direction of the map pointer in his hand, Finny's heart skipped a beat. He realized that they might not be able to live in peace with these mermaids. You must know that what they are facing now is not the mermaid village that Harry and the others will pass by in the future Triwizard Tournament. The mermaid village was on the edge of the Black Lake, not far from Hogwarts. At this time, the village he, the twins and Lee Jordan came to was indeed located deep in the Black Lake. Walking out, you would enter the mouth of the sea. The mermaid village near Hogwarts has some agreements with Hogwarts, and has a good relationship with Dumbledore. Generally, they will not take action against the little wizard who fell into the water. After all, they have no shortage of food, especially in Hogwarts. Woz would provide them with food. The mermaids here are different. Not only do they not have an agreement with Hogwarts, they will not take action against wizards, and they do not have enough food. As a mermaid tribe living in the depths of the Black Lake, they have not captured humans at all. Opportunity. Because there is almost no possibility of ships passing by here. So now that we see Finny in his submarine, it is very dangerous for Finny and the others. One reason why they didn't take action before is that the mermaids now know that wizards are not easy to deal with. Another reason is that Finny and the others were on the periphery at the time and could leave at any time. Based on some principles, the mermaids did not take action directly. However, if the goal of Finny and the others happened to be the mermaid village, it would be equivalent to throwing themselves into a trap. Guys, get ready, there should be a tough battle next. Finny sighed and said to the three George. George, Fred and Lee Jordan naturally saw the pointer mark on the map. Understanding the situation, they tightened their grip on the wand and looked cautiously at the mermaids around them. As long as they make the slightest move, just take action. Fighting is about taking the first opportunity. Now that you know that fighting is inevitable, then don't let the enemy attack first, but catch them by surprise before they do. Sure enough, when the submarine approached the center of the mermaid village, a very old mermaid roared a few times, and many mermaids swam toward the submarine with spears. The speed was so fast that even a few people did not react. They had already arrived near the submarine. Do it. Split it into pieces. Finny yelled, pointed his wand at a fishman and released a splitting spell. Shattered to pieces. George and the others also reacted and hurriedly began to cast spells. Red lights danced in the water, brightening the dark environment and making the mermaid's menacing state a little weaker. But he still charged towards the submarine without fear of death. After all, there are only 4 of them, and they are all little wizards with limited magic power. Especially the 3 George, they are real little wizards, even though Finny's magic level at this time is already much stronger than most adult wizards. Yes. However, 2 fists were no match for 4 feet. Although the attacks of the 4 blocked the mermaids' attack, they still made them come around the submarine and attack the submarine with their spears. Although this submarine is transformed from special book pages and is not affected by magical effects, it is still just a book page. Transfiguration changes the physical state of the object itself, but in essence, what it is originally is what it is. Therefore, in the spear under attack, the submarine did not last long before it suffered some damage. Looking at the submarine that had begun to leak, Li Xiaodan panicked. Finny, what should we do now? George and Fred continued to attack the mermaids outside the submarine, trying to reduce the number of enemies around the submarine, but to no avail. There are more and more damages on the submarine. Even if Finny keeps using magic spells to repair it, it still doesn't help. Knowing in his heart that the only outcome of the battle was failure, Finny began to pour magic power into the submarine with all his strength, speeding it up and moving closer to the target. On the contrary, there has been some improvement in this category. The submarine was so fast that it knocked away the mermaid in front of it, and was being chased by the mermaid behind it, arriving at the location pointed by the map pointer. However, when they actually came here, they were a little dumbfounded because there were no caves, no buildings, not even treasure chests. Here is a blank stretch of sand, nothing. How so? Fred leaned against his brother in disappointment, George's eyes straightened, and Lee Jordan gave up resistance, waiting for the mermaids behind him to catch up, break the submarine, and kill them. Finny frowned and looked at the empty soil in front of him. This was absolutely impossible. The notes in the travel book, the features on this map, and the submarine page all told him that this was impossible. It is the inherited treasure left by Gryffindor. How could it be empty here? The mermaids once again came to the submarine and launched a second attack, but this time, Finny and the others did not resist. George, Fred, and Lee, activate the magic items on your body and activate the port key. These mermaids can destroy the submarine long enough for us to activate the port key and leave here. Hearing this, the three George nodded and were about to activate the props. They were very glad that Finny had prepared these things for them in advance, otherwise, he would have had no choice but to die here today. And just when they were about to activate the port key, the map in Finny's hand emitted a dazzling light. Etc. Finny immediately noticed something unusual about the map in his hand and hurriedly stopped the movement of several people. When George and others heard Finny's voice, they subconsciously stopped what they were doing. You must know that what they stopped at this time was an action that could save their lives, and they only had this chance. They stopped. The mermaids would not give them time to activate the port key a second time. Therefore, they unconditionally believed in Finny with their lives. In fact, their choice was correct. After Finny told them to stop, the map in their hands began to shake and tremble. This is a very obvious feature. The map in Finny's hand is actually a door key that is about to be activated. Thinking of this, Finny hurriedly said, "Quick, hold the map." Although George and the others were still a little confused, they still reached out and took the map. At the same time, the map door key is activated. If they stay there for 1 second at night, they will all stay there and wait to die. However, they succeeded. After a feeling like being squeezed into a leather tube and spinning continuously, Finny and the others came into a dark environment. Finny shook his head a few times to regain his consciousness, and then began to observe the surrounding environment. At the same time, I also had some doubts in my heart. You must know that this is not the first time that Finny has used the port key. He has also experienced many times of apparition. Logically speaking, he should not have such a severe dizziness. However, it still appeared now, and the place where they were at this time looked like a cave, surrounded by irregular stone walls. There is also a semi-arc stone top above the head, and the surrounding light is very dim. The light source is a kind of glowing moss on the stone wall, not natural light. Because there is no exit or obvious natural light source, Finny roughly judges that this place should be a confined space. At this time, George, Fred, and the others also recovered from their dizziness. "Where is this?" Fred asked. Finny shook his head. "I don't know either, but since that map brought us here, there is a high probability that this is the destination we are looking for." George asked excitedly. "Gryffindor's treasure?" Finny nodded. "It should be, but the surroundings are too dark, so I'm not sure." Fluorescent light flashes. As he spoke, he lit up the wand. However, the lighting spell could only light up a small ball of light at the tip of the wand, which was not very useful in such a dim illusion. George looked at his surroundings and hurriedly rummaged through his backpack. Fred saw George's action and realized something, so he helped to turn it over. After a while, the two of them took out a bunch of hard-to-pull fireworks. "Dang dang dang, I wonder who says that we have no use for these things," Fred said proudly. George didn't say anything, but pulled the switch of the fireworks and threw them out. With the light of the fireworks, Finny finally saw the surrounding situation clearly. Behind them was a stone wall that sealed them here. The only way forward was the front. However, fireworks are limited after all and can't illuminate a long distance. Seeing this, George wanted to throw another one out to see the situation farther away, but was stopped by Finny. Wait, George, fireworks are limited after all, and leaving them behind may be very useful. Lee Jordan was stunned and asked. What else can this be used for? Finny pointed to the surrounding environment and said. It's so dark here. If there are really creatures, they must have visual defects. The large amount of light from the fireworks is definitely not a pleasant feeling for them. George said immediately. If we encounter such a difficult existence, we can throw a few fireworks out so that they can't find us in a short time. Fred said excitedly. It's like the Muggle weapon called a flashbang that our dad mentioned. Give us the right time. Finny nodded, confirming that what they both said was what he thought. Well, instead of thinking about these things here, it is better to move on and take a look. With the existence of the portkey boots, we can activate it at any time. As long as there is enough time, it is easy to return to Hogwarts. However, this time the purpose of the adventure is Gryffindor's treasure. After Li Qiaodan lit the wand, he said. That's right. Now that we're all here, we naturally want to see what's inside. Unable to comment, George and Fred also lit their wands and followed them towards the darkness ahead. Under the light of the lighting spell, they also saw the surrounding situation clearly. They did not encounter any particularly dangerous existence along the way. Only a few ordinary creature bats were stimulated by their bright light and flew towards them, but were stopped by them. The magic of several people is done. After all, they are not magical creatures. Not to mention the powerful destructive spells such as the Shadowless Blade that Finny is good at, the commonly used splitting spells, crushing spells, and even petrification spells and sleeping spells can deal with them. They walked forward for a long distance, far beyond the lighting range of the fireworks just now, and came to another stone wall. Is this place completely sealed? Looking at the stone walls in front of him and on his left and right, Li Qiaodan said with some disappointment. George shook his head and said. This is wrong. If this place is completely airtight, where does the air we breathe come from? Finny nodded and agreed with George's statement. George is right. Since there is air and bats here, it means there is an exit. It will definitely not be a completely closed situation. As he spoke, he looked up at the stone roof above his head, but it was also sealed. Fred looked at the stone wall in front of him in confusion. After looking at it for a long time, he slowly walked forward and stretched out his hand to touch the stone wall. Guys! After touching the stone wall a few times, Fred shouted to the three of them. Come here. I found something good. The three of them walked over and saw Fred touching the stone wall, his eyes shining, as if he had discovered something very interesting. Seeing this, George hurriedly stretched out his hand to touch the stone wall, then his eyes lit up, he glanced at Fred, and said to Finny and Lee Jordan. You guys should try it too, it feels amazing. Lee Jordan was frightened by the horrified expressions of George and Fred, and for a moment he did not dare to move. Finny, on the other hand, stretched out his hand to touch the stone wall in confusion, but there was no feeling that his palm was touching something real. Sure enough, the twins were joking. There was no so-called stone wall here, it was just an illusion. However, looking at the twins with funny expressions and the frightened Li Qiaodan, he also turned his eyes and looked at Li Qiaodan with a strange smile. Jordan. Li, come and try it too, it feels wonderful. When Li Qiaodan saw that Finny had also been hit, he fell to the ground in horror, not knowing what to do. The George twins and Finny looked at each other, and the expressions on their faces became even weirder. They looked at Lee Jordan. Lee, come here quickly and touch the stone wall quickly. As the three people kept talking, Lee finally couldn't hold it any longer, screamed in horror, and wanted to get up and run back. Seeing Li Qiaodan's movements to escape, Finny and the others finally couldn't help it anymore and squatted on the ground laughing. Lee Jordan, who lived in the same dormitory with George Fred for one semester, could not understand what was going on when he saw such a scene. He yelled at the three people angrily. Are you kidding me? I'm scared to death. Ha 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 ha, asterisk 3. The three of them couldn't help but continue to laugh. Seeing the three people laughing, Li Qiaodan couldn't help but laugh. Okay, what did you find? Even if Li Qiaodan is a fool, he knows at this time that they must have found a way to solve their current predicament, otherwise they would not joke with him easily. Looking at Lee Jordan who asked the question, Finny chuckled, came to his side, grabbed his arm and touched the wall. This time, Li Qiaodan was scared again. Wasn't it just a joke, now? However, when his hand really touched the wall, he also knew what the three of them had discovered, and looked at the three of them speechlessly. It's not difficult for me to understand that the two of them can joke about this matter, but, Finny, why are you doing the same? Finny smiled and waved. It's interesting, and it's good to lighten the atmosphere at this time. Indeed, under this joke, the original tense and weird atmosphere disappeared, and the cave was filled with laughter and laughter. After everyone laughed for a while, they all stood up and walked towards the stone wall. They did not stop when they were about to touch the stone wall, and passed through the stone wall smoothly. Is this the magic used on the platform at Kingdom Cross Station? George suddenly asked. Finny shook his head and said. The one at the station cannot be triggered unless you run straight in, and this one cannot be touched even with your hands. It is just an illusion. The one at the station is obviously an improved version of this curse. George nodded, indicating that he understood. Fred's eyes beside him were unusually bright. George. Fred. I have a great idea. The twins said in unison, and then hugged each other excitedly. Seeing this, Finny and Lee Jordan shook their heads helplessly and looked at the platform in front of them that was already bright. This place is much more than the cave behind them. It is a prototype platform, but there is a circle of water flow a little away from the center of the platform, dividing them. Finny and the other four can see the throne and treasure chest on the platform surrounded by water in the center of this space just standing there. It seems that there is Gryffindor's treasure there, but it seems that there may be some danger in this water, everyone be careful. George looked at the circle of lakes, and his heart moved. He lit a firework and threw it in. Because of the fireworks, several people also saw the things in the water clearly. It was the mermaid who tried to attack them before, and several long whiskers. It's a mermaid and an octopus. Lee Jordan said. Finny thought for a moment. Do you think this octopus leg is the leg of the big octopus in the Black Lake? In other words, it's Gryffindor's leg? George was stunned and asked. You mean, Gryffindor has actually been guarding this place all the time? Fred thought for a moment and said. It's really possible. While several people were talking, the mermaid in the water was angered by the fireworks and began to surface and move towards the four people. Okay, let's talk about anything later. Let's deal with these brutal guys first. Li Qiaodan said, and at the same time he sent out several crushing spells. The divine edge is shadowless. Finny also cast spells on the mermaids rushing towards him, constantly harvesting lives. George, Fred, and Lee Jordan were obviously fighting for the first time, but their movements were agile and they didn't feel any discomfort at all. Of course, this may also be because they usually help kill some poultry at home. At the same time, they do not regard the mermaids who attack them and others as humanoid creatures, but as some kind of mermaids. Fantastic beasts. This time, the number of mermaids was much smaller than the ones they encountered in the Black Lake, so naturally they wouldn't be in the same situation that they were exhausted from dealing with before. However, completely dealing with these mermaids still made them quite tired. Okay, let's take a rest. The only thing left in the water is the big octopus that seems to be Gryffindor. If it is really Gryffindor, we will not be in danger. Fred asked doubtfully. In this case, isn't the treasure right in front of us? Why don't we get the treasure first and rest? Finny shook his head and said. You know, half of those who travel 100 miles are 99. The closer you are to success, the more careful you must be to prevent accidents. Since Finny said so, the four of them simply cleaned up the corpses around them and sat on the ground. Li Qiaodan also opened his backpack and took out the food inside, and the four of them shared it and ate it. Eating inside a corpse was not only the first time for Finny, but also the first experience for George and Fred. However, because we were all tired, we didn't feel any nausea at all. Maybe I was too tired to care about feeling sick. After having their fill of wine and food, the four of them stood up from the ground and prepared to cross the lake and reach the island in the center. When they came to the water's edge, the octopus legs in the water stretched out and kept swaying on the water, which looked very scary. As the octopus legs continued to swing, the huge octopus head also stretched out from the water. Two protruding blue eyes stared at the four people. 8 octopuses retreated around the huge head and kept waving. He was standing there, as if he was about to attack several people at any time. However, in fact, the octopus had no intention of attacking Finny and the others. It just stopped them every time they tried to cross the water. After Fred was sure that the octopus would not attack them, he plunged into the water and tried to swim to the other side. As a result, he was directly rolled up by an octopus leg, and then was sent back to the shore while everyone was panicking. "Look, this guy doesn't want us to pass," Finny said with emotion. George said with some disappointment. "We're all here, but it turns out we can't get through this last step. What a pity." Fred nodded. "Yes, but this experience was good. It was a great adventure." Finny shook his head and said, "It's just not in my character to give up like that." He frowned and looked at the octopus that occupied most of the water, thinking about possible solutions. After a moment, he waved the wand in his hand, and several stone pillars protruded from the ground near the water, wrapping around the octopus like ropes. The octopus naturally refused to be controlled like this and got entangled with those stone pillars. "It's now." Finny gave a low drink and ran towards the water. Although George, Fred and Lee Jordan didn't quite understand what Finny meant, they still ran after him. I saw Finny's wand dancing, and a stone bridge slowly emerged on the water. The four of them stepped onto the stone bridge and arrived at the central island on the other side of the water. The big octopus was still entangled with those stone pillars at this time, and there was no way to distract Finny and the others. Lee Jordan punched Finny excitedly and said, "It's really yours, I can think of all these." Finny shrugged and said, "As we have deduced, this big octopus is probably Gryffindor, so his purpose here is easy to guess." Fred asked, "What purpose?" Finny explained with a smile. "Either to test whether we are qualified to inherit his inheritance and treasures, or to protect us. There may be other existences in the water that can threaten our lives, so he won't let us near the water. Let alone let us go into the water." George looked at Finny doubtfully, and then at the big octopus who was still entangled with the stone pillar. He suddenly thought of some possibilities and asked uncertainly, "Finny, you mean, it was actually a test just now?" Finny nodded and said, "It's very possible, but it can't be ruled out that it's protecting us, so I chose to come here this way." As he spoke, he pointed to the stone bridge behind him. "This way we won't be close to the water. Even if there is danger in the water, it won't have any impact on us. As for the octopus, it was attracted by the stone pillars I used to transform. Naturally, there is no way to stop us." George and Fred nodded, understanding what Finny meant, but Lee Jordan was still a little confused and asked, "But Finny, you should know a lot of spells that can control octopuses, why did you choose transfiguration?" Finny smiled and looked at Lee Jordan and said, "Lee, do you remember the contents of Gryffindor's notes? He cast a spell on himself to keep himself in the form of a Animagus permanently. Not to mention how difficult this spell is, there are very few wizards who can complete the Animagus spell, so Gryffindor is very the big one might be a master of transfiguration." Lee Jordan immediately understood what Finny meant. "You mean, the inheritance left by Gryffindor is probably about transfiguration, so his test should also be about transfiguration." Finny nodded, pointed in the direction of the big octopus and said, I guessed right, look there." George and the other two looked over and found that the stone pillars had disappeared at this time, and the big octopus had no intention of sending them to the other side. Instead, it looked at Finny with a very uncoordinated satisfaction in its eyes. If it was a human or a humanoid creature, George and the others would not feel uncomfortable with this look, but when a particularly large octopus looks at you with very human emotional eyes, you can really feel a chill and inexplicable weirdness. However, this violation also proves that Finny's judgment is correct from another angle. Octopus, or Gryffindor, is testing a few people, and Finny's level of transfiguration should be qualified. Octopus then no more blocking the actions of a few people. "Okay, let's go see what Gryffindor has left for us." Finny spoke, interrupting the weird atmosphere and calling back the minds of several people. Several people walked to the middle of the island and looked at the all-metal throne and the treasure box next to the throne. "Let's open the box first," George suggested. Finny nodded. "I think so too. Compared to this throne, I am more interested in the contents of the box. When Fred heard this, he opened the box directly and revealed the contents. Yes, the box of Gryffindor's treasure was unlocked. You could just open it. It was very easy. The treasure chest was not filled with glittering gold galleons as George and Fred imagined, nor were there the various gems that Lee Jordan imagined, nor were there any books and notes that Finny thought were inheritance. Inside the box was a set of clothes, including a robe, cloak, boots, and a pair of gloves, but no hat. Fred took out his clothes in disappointment and threw them on the ground. What was underneath the clothes was revealed. It was a sword, a half-sword, the guard of the cross, a ruby weight, and some runic words engraved on the hilt. George picked up the sword and pulled it out of the scabbard. Came out, revealing the silver-white sword body with cold light. I saw the words Godric Gryffindor engraved on the silver-white metal sword. Finny finally checked Bao Jian. It is indeed fairy metal, so this is the real sword of Gryffindor. George and Fred were stunned, looked at each other, and then said in unison. It's so beautiful, it must be worth a lot of money. Finny shook his head and said to the twins. There's no need to think about money. This thing belongs to Hogwarts. No one will buy it even if we sell it. Even if someone dares to buy it, do you really want to sell Gryffindor's sword? Sold. George and Fred looked at each other and said. Really, I'm a little reluctant to sell it. Then why don't we take it back to Hogwarts and give it to Dumbledore? In that case, he will definitely give us a special contribution award. If we get that award, Percy won't be able to show off in front of us. That way Mom will definitely make us proud. Listening to the conversation between the two, Finny nodded and said. It is indeed necessary to take it back. I think Professor Dumbledore also needs this sword very much at this time. Li Xiaodan said. Is this really Gryffindor's treasure? Why can only this sword be considered a treasure? Finny nodded and said. It should be right here. As for the treasure, well. Finny pointed to the clothes thrown by George on the ground and continued. Those are the ones. You wouldn't think that a set of clothes that haven't rotted away from 1,000 years ago is an ordinary item, right? After hearing Finny's words, the three of them realized that, yes, the treasure left by Gryffindor was 1,000 years ago, so naturally this set of clothes was from that time, too. Ordinary clothes would have become rotten after being stored for so long, but the set of clothes in front of me can still maintain its original appearance. How could it be an ordinary item? Finny continued. If I remember correctly, the sorting hat in Hogwarts used to be Gryffindor's hat, and there happens to be one missing hat here. George's eyes lit up and he said. You mean these clothes are the same as the sorting hat? Finny nodded. It's very possible, even if it's different, these clothes are definitely powerful magic items. Fred squatted on the ground and looked at the clothes curiously, then shook his head at the three of them and said. The important thing is that we didn't find anything. Li Xiaodan suddenly said. Wait, guys, I think I found something. Several people turned around and found that Li Xiaodan had gone to study the box while they were focusing on their clothes. I saw him taking out a piece of parchment from the box, handing it to several people and saying. I found this in the box. It may be of some use. Finny finally opened the parchment and looked at it. After a while, he smiled and said to several people. Okay, guys, now I can tell you for sure that these clothes are really similar to the sorting hat. It's just that they haven't been infused with wisdom first, so they can't be like the sorting hat. And the ones I have are it's a way of injecting intelligence into these objects. George and Fred's eyes lit up. According to Finny, they might have a sorting hat that only belongs to them. Finny smiled and handed the parchment to the twins and continued. However, even if we inject wisdom into these clothes, they will not be like the sorting hat. The reason why the sorting hat can be sorted is because the wisdom in it was injected by the four founders. George waved his hand and said. It's okay, what we care about is not having the sorting hat, but having a piece of clothing with its own wisdom. Finny shrugged and said. In this case, let's divide these clothes. There are exactly 4 pieces of gloves, boots, robes and cloaks, one for each person. You can choose first. Li Xiaodan shrugged and said. According to the introduction on the parchment, clothing in different positions may have unique characteristics after being endowed with wisdom. For example, the sorting hat symbolizes the mind. Finny nodded and said, "If nothing else, the gloves are for duels and combat, the boots are for speed and movement, the robes are probably for protection, and the cloaks are probably for invisibility." George and Fred looked at each other and said, "In that case, we want cloaks and boots." Lee Jordan looked at Finny and asked, "Which one do you want?" Finny smiled and said, "I'll give you the robe. If nothing else, it should also be able to increase your magic level. I prefer the gloves to give you a bonus in duels. Of course, these are all speculations on my part. There may be accidents. Everyone is happy. Enough." Li Qiaodan nodded. "Then I'll take the robe." Then he handed the gloves to Finny. "Shall we start now?" Finny nodded. "Let's start." As he spoke, he sat on the ground with his gloves and cast spells on the gloves according to the method on the parchment. In fact, it is not that difficult to inject wisdom into objects. A simple incantation spell, plus a memory and a certain amount of magic power, can. The most difficult thing about this matter is that the item that is infused with wisdom must be a magic item, and it must be a powerful magic item. Finny's guess was correct. The set of clothes left by Gryffindor itself was a magic item. The robe has the function of increasing the user's magic level, improving one's own resistance and protecting against harm. Of course, this is to a certain extent. It cannot be said that all magic spells can protect. The cloak also has two functions, one is flight and the other is invisibility, both of which are permanent, but require the user to inject magic power to activate them. The boots have a certain increase in speed, and are solidified with a phantom transformation spell. As Finny guessed, the gloves have a bonus in combat, enhancing the user's magic control effect. They also have the function of a simple wand. To put it simply, using this pair of gloves, you can perform some simple magic spells without a wand. Just use the gloves as a wand. Of course, this can only be used on some simple magic spells, such as unlocking spells and floating spells. Curses, transfiguration spells, healing spells, and combat spells are all unavailable. However, perhaps because Gryffindor itself is a master of transfiguration, the gloves have the highest bonus in transfiguration. After some operations, several people gave wisdom to the items in their hands. Fred's cloak automatically floated behind him and hung on his body. George put his boots on his feet. When he tried to tread water, the boots would automatically take George out of there. Li Qiaodan's robe was put on his body very quietly. However, looking at the collar shaking from time to time, you knew that he had succeeded. As for Finny's gloves, they were placed on his shoulders, just like a pair of real hands, busy with Finny adjusting his collar. Finny gently raised his hand, and the gloves slipped on by themselves. "Okay, now let's see what this throne is for. I don't believe Gryffindor would leave such a redundant thing. Besides, I haven't found his inheritance yet." Li Qiaodan took out the map he had put away before and said, "What I wanted to tell you just now is that after we arrived on this island, a sentence appeared on this map, replacing the original pointer." Finny was stunned and asked, "What are the words?" "Brave and fearless." Finny heard this and smiled. It's really Gryffindor style. With that said, he sat on the throne. It was such an obvious reminder that if Finny couldn't guess it yet, it can only be said that he was ashamed of his status as the heir of Ravenclaw. Heroes are fearless. Finny sat in his seat and whispered softly. The throne suddenly emitted a dazzling light, shrouding Finny inside, and many memories suddenly appeared in his mind out of thin air. After a moment, the light disappeared, and Finny walked down from the throne with a smile, and said to the three of them, "Sit on it and say those words to activate it. It will directly instill the legacy of Gryffindor into your minds. It's all about transfiguration. It's very useful." George sat on the throne suspiciously and repeated Finny's actions, with the same effect and the same conclusion, followed by Fred and Lee Jordan. While they were receiving the inheritance, Finny was sorting out the knowledge they had gained. Gryffindor is different from Ravenclaw. Ravenclaw's inheritance contains very few things based on magic texts, and more advanced knowledge. Perhaps it is because wanting to enter Ravenclaw's Chamber of Secrets is inherently difficult. It requires a high level of magic knowledge. Gryffindor's inheritance has many foundations in transfiguration. With this knowledge, Finny's understanding of transfiguration has reached a higher level. At the same time, in addition to these basics, there are many advanced transformation techniques, such as animagus skills and experience, and some special magic. Techniques and methods of using transfiguration on elements to increase their power, such as Finny's previous magic of turning stones into stone pillars to entangle octopuses. Now that he has acquired this knowledge, Finny can use them more skillfully and with greater power. Now Finny can use the fire spell and the transformation spell to change the shape of the summoned flame into snakes, phoenixes, lions and other biological traits. In addition to having certain biological characteristics, the power is also more powerful. After a while, Li Xiaodan also walked down from the throne and said to the three of them, "I'm ready." Finny nodded and said, "If we look around again and there's nothing else, we can leave here." Speaking of this, Finny suddenly remembered something and said to Lee Jordan, "By the way, Lee, leave that map here when you leave. You all know what kind of dangers we encountered along the way. It's better not to let others know about this place. Moreover, once we know the location of this place, in the future you can apparate here, and you don't need a map." Lee Jordan nodded. He and George Fred had similar ideas, but more importantly they didn't want other people to know about this place. After knowing that George's boots could apparate, they had the idea to turn this place into their secret base idea. Let alone anything else, if the incident of the mysterious man 10 years ago happened again, they could hide here completely, and they didn't need the protection of the Fidelius charm at all, because of the confined space here. There was no other way to get here except the door key of the map and the apparition, and if they didn't come here, they couldn't use the apparition, so this would be a top secret and safe place. After that, several people began to search in the cave to make sure that there were no other items on the surface. Finny waved his wand at the water circle surrounding the island, and he didn't even need to recite the spell. With the addition of the gloves, he easily turned the water into a water snake flying in the air. The big octopus had left long ago, and the situation around now revealed the situation inside without the water. Sure enough, their initial guess was correct. There were some other dangers in the water, and many Grindylows hidden in the water plants. Finny controlled the water snake to fly to the side and cast a fire spell on the water plants. Flames are blazing. The flames under the blessing of transfiguration turned into a fire snake that moved freely in the canal, burning the Grindylows to death. Afterwards, Finny used magic to seal the caves connecting this area to the bottom of the Black Lake. This space has completely become a place that can only be entered through magic such as apparition. The four of them looked at each other, threw the map into the box, and activated the door key on their feet.